So how does the U.S. stack up with other parts of the world when it comes to wages? Well, in Shanghai, the monthly minimum wage ranges from $237 to $265 a month. The average monthly salary there is more than $750. In Mexico, Latin America's second largest economy, the minimum wage is about $5 per day or $100 each month. At that rate, almost half of the country's workers are considered poor. France, though, enjoys one of the highest minimum wage rates in the European Union. Workers there earn about $1,900 a month. The average monthly salary is about $3,500. And for more on this, I'm joined here in the studio by Peter Morici. He's a professor at the Robert H. Smith School of Business at the University of Maryland. And in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, we have Antonio Calari. He's an economics professor at Franklin and Marshall College. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Antonio, let's start with you. You know, the United States seems to be doing better than many other countries around the world. How do you think the United States stacks up? And do you think it's fair to compare the United States to Denmark, France, and Germany, which have a much higher minimum wage?
I'm sorry, I didn't get that question. Are you asking me, can you ask it again?
Sure. How do you think the United States stacks up in terms of minimum wage compared to other countries around the world? Because, you know, you see Denmark, Germany, France have a much higher minimum wage.
Yes. Okay. The United States stacks up fairly well in the world, not as well as some of the high countries that you just mentioned. But it is above the wage in many other areas of the world, except that the U.S. doesn't stack up well versus the wealthier areas of the world, Australia, France, Belgium, and the Scandinavian countries. So we should be doing better given the level of wealth that we have.
Peter, what do you make of this? Because obviously those countries are taxed at a much higher rate than the United States. There's a lot of unemployment there as well.
Well, I think you have to compare apples with apples. It's important to recognize the United States is a continental economy. It's not a small country like Denmark. We could certainly sustain a higher minimum wage without much damage to employment than a place like Manhattan, and the same thing goes for Brussels. But $10.10 an hour in a place like Memphis would cause a great deal of unemployment. The Congressional Budget Office, which is nonpartisan and certainly not, you know, in the vest pocket of the Republican Party, came to the conclusion that raising the minimum wage to $10.10 an hour would cause unemployment of about 500,000 additional people. What that means is, if there's 10 people working at McDonald's, and you raise the minimum wage by 20%, well, gee, everybody's better off, except for the 2 people out of the 10 that lose their job, because McDonald's is preparing to automate to deal with this.
Well, let's bring this out and look at this globally. Let's look at it in terms of competition. Would a higher minimum wage here in the United States, let's say 10.10, put U.S. corporations at a competitive disadvantage against its global counterparts?
Well, we really don't compete with that kind of labor in global markets. That's not the issue. These are mostly service jobs at places like McDonald's. Americans export things like jet engines, and hardly anybody in a Boeing plant or a Pratt & Whitney plant or any place like that is earning, you know, $7 an hour. And there's another thing. The woman that you showed in the clip is not living on $7.15 an hour. She gets Medicaid, she gets an earned income tax credit. Hopefully there's a couple of fathers involved with those kids and that they're paying child support. The fact is they wouldn't be eating on $7 an hour. It would be impossible. They get food stamps. The reality is there's quite a lot of support programs available for poorer workers. I'd like to see them earn more, but I don't want to do that by putting 20% of them out of work.
Antonio, do you think a higher
yes.
minimum wage in the United States will get these people out of poverty like the ones that Peter is mentioning?
Well, it would go a long way towards putting people out of poverty. When the minimum wage was indexed in today's terms closer to $10 an hour, in fact, people came close to meeting levels of poverty with the higher minimum wage. Ever since the minimum wage hasn't kept up, in fact, people have fallen considerably below the levels of poverty. So the minimum age will help quite a bit. And I also like to say that if it's true that in some cases some jobs would be lost, a minimum wage would also create other types of jobs because it would give people more money to spend. Merchants would be able to sell more to people receiving a higher level of income, and that would generate jobs. It's unclear that a minimum wage would end up cutting down levels of employment. It would cut down on employment on certain jobs, but that would be possibly made up and more than made up in other types of jobs that would be created with the money that these people are spending.
But Peter,
And as the
I need to respond to
there's
that.
also the question. There is the question of a lot of conservatives are in favor of a minimum wage because if you pay people a living wage, then they will not need to depend on government programs.
Antonio, let's
and
let
so that's good for government budgets.
Antonio, let's let Peter weigh in. You said
The
quite often.
Congressional Budget Office study took a net look. The reality is there'd be 500,000 people fewer employed in the United States. Certainly, if you give people more money to spend and they spend it, it'll create some jobs. But overall,
Yeah.
No, Antonio, I listened to you. But overall, the Congressional Budget Office, and they did sound economics. I looked at the study. They found that on a net basis, 500,000 jobs would be lost. That's 1/3 of a percentage point of unemployment. That's quite a bit. And I think it's not something that we can sneeze about. I went to school to study economics like you did. And where did you learn that raising the price of something increases demand? If I raise the price of apples, I sell fewer apples. If I raise the price of work, I hire fewer workers.
No, there are all sorts of income effects throughout the economy. And models, depends on assumptions that are made, depends on all sorts of conditions. And it's pretty unclear that the reality never plays out the way a model kind of projects it.
So you've decided
So
to
we don't
repeal
know, and
modern economics.
There are studies all over the place about the net effects of increases in the minimum wage. And so it's quite possible that by increasing the minimum wage in certain areas of the country immediately, the level of employment would go down, but in other areas of the country, it might go up. And there will be a reorganization, right, of patterns of industry throughout the country. So increasing the minimum wage everywhere may change the relationship of states like Tennessee to that like states like Pennsylvania or higher wage areas.
Peter,
So once you change something like wages, that changes the whole dynamic, and the system therefore ends up possibly providing higher levels of employment, not
Peter,
lower
we've
levels
got
of
30
employment.
seconds. 30
According
seconds
to
left,
that-
guys. You have the last word.
According to that logic, if we raise the wage rate to $30 an hour, then we would have no more poverty. Everybody would be middle class, and that's absolutely absurd.
All right. Peter Marisi, last word there. Antonio Colari. That's all the time we have. Thank you both for joining us.
Yeah.